here, the artist subjects from the film. We also have Roz Owen, the director, and Jim Miller, the producer of the film. So I'd like to invite them up here, Roz and Jim, to start. Are you here somewhere? Oh, you're way back there. Okay, come on down. I should have warned you, I guess, to sit in the front. Just to say a few words, and then afterwards we will have a discussion with the filmmakers and the artists. And we also have here from ATSA, if anyone has some questions about related works here in the city. I'm going to pass the mic to Roz.
Thank you. It's lovely to see everybody here. It's so cold out, and we were thinking, oh, nobody's going to come. But, I know that we were expecting to speak afterwards, so I'm just going to say hello and introduce myself. I'm Jim. It's my partner and also the editor.
Hello. And yeah, I think we'll save most of it for afterwards because it's hard to follow up all the announcements, so which are great. But love to. It's great to have a Q&A. So, and I know you guys do it really well. So we're happy to do that. And Carole and Karl are here, and I think it'll be easier that way. So,
yes,
yeah.
Excellent.
We've been active in a number of artist-run centers and a number of arts initiatives within the arts community, and so, you know, we have that involvement, but also we've been involved with CARFAC, and presently I'm the lead negotiator for CARFAC with the National Gallery of Canada, and it's been a negotiation that's been going on for 10 years now, and we actually charged them with bargaining bad faith about a year ago, and we won, and they're appealing it now, and we're waiting to hear on the appeal. And what's behind it is their refusal to negotiate copyright fees. They say that copyright fees are not something that you can bargain, basically a minimum fee. We're not saying that artists can't get paid, negotiate above a minimum fee, but they should not be paid below minimum fee. And this is a really important struggle because the whole thing of minimum fees for artists is incredibly important. But on your larger point, I think there is a point of solidarity between workers in the larger sense and artists as workers. And I think in terms of the larger struggles that connection has to be made, and I think that's what we've been involved in over the years in working with the trade union movement, is to bring a cultural politic into the union movement itself so that they're not just dealing with, you know, the social issues that they deal with, but also include culture as one of the issues that they, you know, will struggle for in terms of democratic rights, in terms of payments for artists, in terms of access to culture for all people, and these sorts of issues.
And on top of it all, we've been involved with Mayworks, and actually our son was in Mayworks in Vancouver for almost 5 years too. He was running that. And the Ontario Workers Arts and Heritage Centre, we're also on the board and founders of that organization. So again, I think that all artists or all culture workers, it's not just the voice of the community you're bringing forward, but also you're actually, like Keith, the young man just said, you're fighting for the rights of artists within or the culture workers within in order to get economic basis.
I need to make a correction here. It's not CARFAC, but it's CARFAC RAV that is negotiating with the National Gallery, RAV being the Artists Association in Quebec. And we're one of the few associations that do a joint negotiation, both Quebec and the rest of Canada, in terms of a federal producer.
Yes, yes, we got one.
Carole and Karl, I mean, many of us, but Carole and Karl centrally have been really working on a number of fronts. We focused on their art activity in the film, but there's been a lot of sort of community activism beyond that. So Carole, there's just mentioned a couple of them, and Karl's involvement with the negotiations.
And also the Ontario Arts Council. What you're doing is there at different points we went in and argued for more women being able to get grants and putting more women on the juries. And then after that we got community arts in. And for a while we even had half the jury for community arts was Labour, because we were on the jury. They got rid of that after about 4 or 5 years, but they went, and still we still have community arts projects that happen. So yeah. So but Jim's also been very active. He's been underplaying himself. He's also been over the years very, very active in all of those organizations. So
which is nice to hear. But I think the thing is, it's interesting. They cover a lot of bases in the work they do. But I think one of the things that was very interesting for Roz and I was how the exhibit that was in 1976 at the AGO was a sort of critique of the art world, the art system from the vantage point of insiders being artists. And it was sort of it was 40 years ago almost. But thereafter, a lot of the focus was bringing sort of cultural sort of activity into other spheres, into the labor movement, into different sort of workplace situations. And I guess Roz and I are, and me in particular, very interested in sort of bringing the focus back into the cultural sort of sphere itself. Because what they were reacting to years ago, continue to, and many of us do, is the fact that sort of culture has long been had a tether that we don't necessarily like to sort of the 1%, and the kind of paradigm that they're looking at is one that is art based in community, and I think it's sort of the cultural commons, that sort of idea. So I think that's something that requires a lot of people to work and try and bring. That's where culture can sort of seem vital in a community sense.
Well, I think you have two people here who are absolutely passionate, and that's one of the things, that's one of the reasons we made this film, because they have stuck to their guns and have not changed in their passion for that drive to have a voice that saying art is political. So in that, I don't think everybody, people are different, and some artists are like Carole and Karl and have that same passion, but I think to me they're a great inspiration for that reason. So that was my first.
In answer to the first part of the question, I think if you talk to a lot of working people, they do feel a real responsibility towards the work in the communities they're working in. I don't think the majority of people simply say it's a job and I just do the job and go home. I think people do, when we talk to healthcare workers, when we talk to whatever industry, fishery, forestry, etc., there is a sense of a social responsibility, not with all the workers, but with a significant number of them. So I disagree with that first point. So when artists say, well, I'm just doing my art as a job, I say, well, there's a problem there. There's a certain social responsibility. In a way, artists have a certain privilege. And with that privilege, they have to acknowledge a certain social debt, in a certain sense, that they have to the society they live in, and to be able to express what are of concerns in that society. In terms of the example you gave in terms of the Cochabamba incident, you've got to remember that Cochabamba laid the groundwork for the eventual election of Evo Morales and a whole shift within Bolivian society. So I don't think it was a total loss. But you're right in the sense that there's always a backlash in terms of struggle. And that's something that we always have to constantly deal with. That in any struggle, whether they're in Quebec, whether they're in Bolivia or wherever else, there is going to be a backlash. Capital doesn't sit there and say, oh, you're right. They say, sorry, we're going to, get back. So I think you have to look at it in those terms, in terms of the struggles. In terms of are artists becoming more politically active in a sense, I think yes, in certain sectors. Just as I said, among workers, you will find many workers who have a sense of social responsibility. I think among artists, you'll find many artists who have a sense of social responsibility. Not all artists, but a significant number.
The same way you're doing in Quebec, which is to give support for the councils and ways to actually give money, and as I say, taxpayers' money. But in other words, that support has to go and the fight has to go for whatever the struggle that's going on within your arts councils, whether it be Ontario, in our case, Ontario Arts Council, here's Quebec, but then Canada Council too, as you've noticed. You now have to have 3 years in Europe or something before you can get a grant in Canada Council. They become outrageous. But some of those struggles have to go on by artists with those councils to change them.
I mean, one of the things we argue, and I think in that vein, because we're, active in the union movement around developing cultural policy and this sort of thing. And one of them is that's public money. And there should be demands that that money be accessible to more than just the elite institutions that it's basically funneled into. And that actually developed in Ontario into the Artists in the Workplace program, which is a, Arts Council agency that's funding artists to work with trade unions as well as communities. And it was interesting because when we approached the Ontario Arts Council on that, we said, well, your mandate as the Canada Council, and I assume the Quebec Council, is to basically provide the arts for the people, right? It's a government agency. So if you want to reach the people, how are you going to reach them, right? If you really want to make it public in that sense. And they're kind of vulnerable to that argument, but it takes a lot of work to fight it because, all the comments come on, well, it'll just be political, it'll be, community arts is really just amateur arts or, whatever. And all those arguments you'll get from a relatively elite kind of vision of those things. But it's a struggle worth fighting. And one of the things we always say is that when we approach a union's project, we say we will apply for public funds to do this project. And that's important, that you support this and that this be done, and that artists should be able to get funding for these kind of projects with communities and with different social sectors.
Yeah, deliver some value back to the taxpayers.
One would hope.
They get tax write-offs for doing the ads for Frigidaire or something, or, they get tax write-offs.
One of the sort of spin-offs for me in terms of doing this work, I mean, we've known Carole and Karl for quite a long time, but we've been immersed in this project for several years, and one of the things, as I was saying earlier, that their focus began with this sort of self-awareness within the art world, and then it began to sort of branch out. It's always been rooted in culture. But one of the things I'm interested in doing is turning it back to the focus back to how the cultural commons movement, I guess, and looking at things where our public funds do go into the large institutions, which have this kind of they have a distance where ordinary people maybe don't feel comfortable, they don't feel like it's theirs. And I think I'm interested in working to shift the goalposts, I guess. And anyway, if you're interested, I know they often have sign-up sheets, and I don't even have one. But if anyone is interested, I'm sort of trying to build a community, at least a discussion community around this kind of issue. So maybe someone.
In Montreal or in Toronto?
Well,
in Toronto, but about working online. Yeah.
Online. For instance, one of the things that I will be doing is publishing the catalog from their exhibit, which was really it's still Privileged Art exhibit in 1976. It was really a sort of manifesto where they were, and it was a very interesting, insightful, humorous, and provocative manifesto where they're really looking at this predicament of the artist in a sort of market-driven art system and how to break out of that.
That's the book that the AGO took out of it.
Well, they didn't take that's the book the AGO took out of the bookshop. But it's a great document. So in a few months, I'm going to be publishing that online and in a serial form, because it'll be great to just sort of have a spread or two every couple of weeks and create a conversation and look back at the conversation that's already evolved out of that piece over the last 4 decades almost. But anyway, you need to have sort of areas like film screenings or online or turn exhibits into places where people can actually have a discussion about these things and begin to mobilize.
And obviously, Politica is doing it both in Toronto, which is where we first seen it, and it does bring out the progressive community and the cultural community. We only get it once a month in Toronto when they're doing the one you're doing for March 8th. So I forgot the title of it. The women's.
Okay. One thing I think is you can't go as an artist believing that you're going to change the world. what you're doing is you're contributing to larger movements. And what you're hoping to do is build a vocabulary or an imagery within that movement, perhaps provide it with a kind of an imaginary in a certain sense, which somebody used in the film. So you're really no single work, no artwork's going to change the world. So measuring its impact is kind of gradual, and one of the things that we've learned is it takes time. I mean, one of the criticisms we have of some artists who claim kind of political activity is they parachute into a situation, do something, and then go somewhere else. Whereas we really believe that it's a long-term commitment, and you need to stay in a community and work with that community over time, and you will see the impact that it has over time. And so it's a gradual process. You begin building different things. You begin creating different kinds of infrastructures. You begin building a kind of volume of work. You support other artists. You share with them, and it's a collective process. So it's not measurable in any kind of immediate, this work had a particular impact kind of sense. What was the other part?
And the other part about, when people say community, and we of course are talking about the labor community or working people around environmental issues and so on, but that's ours. There's around the Palestinian issue, I mean, there's zillions of artists who are producing films and videos and works around women's movement, my God, at least since the 60s and stuff, earlier than that. But in New York, all of the work that was done and all the work that is continuously being done around gay, lesbian, so in other words, what you're talking about when you use the term community, we are specifically working within one community, dealing with environment and health and all different issues, but within that working. And so one of the things when people ask why do we do the kinds of images and the stories and the narratives, one of the things that most working people who don't go to an art gallery, so they don't know the artist that you're talking about, but they have certainly had brainwashed with all the ads and all of the stuff that comes across the TV and the movies and that sort of thing. So of course, that meant that when we're making a choice as to how to move forward, it was not going to be with a cartooning style, and it certainly wouldn't be with wood and poles on the ground. It would have to be in some way telling a story that would be readable within the community you're working in, and that's probably why you see the kinds of work that we ended up, because it also was something we could collectively work on together. So a camera is something, yes, you can point it, yes, we can look at it, yes, we do drawings before we do the camera, yes, we talk to the people about with the drawings, and then we do our own mock-ups being the people in the, so we find a way to be able to get the back information from the community as to, I don't know if that should be, that kind of thing. So we give them a lot of material to work with when we're working with them.
And I'll just very shortly, because we've got another, I've got this. I think, for me, when I hear the question about measuring, I feel, as I've been able to listen, if I look back, I know that we have been involved in a number of things where, say, at A-Space in Toronto, the Artist Fund Center there, there were a lot of issues there that were in the late 70s or early 80s were being dealt with that were not, just in terms of representation and involvement and actually have a sort of democratic sort of collective participation in how the place was run. Those were, at the time, not at all, they weren't the norm. And many of those things they're not necessarily all successful, but they're more part of our whole society now. So I think we can look back over just a short few decades and see change. But it does take a time to measure. Anyway, I'll leave it there.
I think what I mean by that is artists have an access that most people don't have to being able to make statements and express certain kinds of things. In other words, once you become involved in, and I'm saying all artists, there are some artists who don't have that, but for a lot of artists, the privilege is that we are able to speak certain things. And most people don't have that kind of access, don't have that ability. We could get into a sociological analysis and look at the class background of artists, and there's all that kind of stuff. That often, artists come out of the middle class, which provides a certain privilege. Certainly in terms of, issues around gender and race, those were always questions that came in terms of who had that privilege, etc. So, yeah, I think in that sense, you know, artists are in a position, even though we don't get paid much for what we do get exposed.
My daughter makes more money driving a truck than I make. Yeah.
But she doesn't get hurt very much.
Yeah, right, that's true. Yeah, you go ahead. No,
Okay. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to thank Carl and Carole and Roz and Jim for being here and making their wonderful art and this wonderful film, and thank you all for sticking around for the Q&A.